I have to confess there's a bit of a change in the orientation of my paper. So on top is the official title as printed in the program. But as I worked more with the material, preparing this, the idea of market economy, ethnicity seemed not the way to the right framework. So I won't be referring really to that idea at all, except maybe tangentially. So the unofficial title for the paper is Who Are the Laz? Music and Cultural Identity on the Turkish Black Sea Coast. And very quickly, my theoretical framework, this will be mostly a descriptive paper where I'll play examples and give some background to them. So the theoretical framework that informs this, but which I'm not going to refer to after this first slide. My starting point is a metaphor that Martin Stokes uses in his book, The Republic of Love, on cultural intimacy in Turkish popular music. This metaphor of different recordings being in dialogue with each other, and how this constitutes a kind of musical public sphere in which dialogue is done not through the sort of classic Habermasian model of rational public discourse, but also through non-linguistic signs like still images and video clips, and also embodied gestures such as dance and other ways of using the body. My argument is that competing versions of the identity of the Laz emerge from this dialogue. So who the Laz are is not something I can start out at the beginning and say, this is the Laz and this is their music. The whole concept of who the Laz are is being musically negotiated. And this dialogue occurs, or at least much of it, through commercially released recordings and associated media like music videos, and through their mediation on radio, TV, the internet. And the idea is that this identity is constructed and enabled through the consumption of cultural products. So who are the Laz? One approach is taken by social scientists. So there's a husband and wife team of ethnographers named Ildiko Belerhan and Chris Han, who have a book-length ethnography of the region in which the Laz live. And then there are also a number of papers published by them individually or separately. And there's also an anthropologist and ethnohistorian named Michael Meeker who has worked on this topic. So summarizing a lot of their work. So there is an ethno-linguistic group known as the Laz in northeastern Turkey. So the area where the Laz language is spoken historically is actually fairly small. It's a little sliver of territory in northeast Turkey. So the part that is dark green on the lighter green part of Turkey as a whole in this picture. And in terms of the physical map and the political map, they inhabit an area from about the middle of the province of Rize, beginning more or less around the town of Pazar, and then going up to the Georgian border. So it's two provinces in Turkey, Rize province and Artvin province. And they live along the coast and then up into the foothills of the Kachkar Mountains, which can even sometimes be referred to as the Turkish Caucasus, because it's basically continuous with the Caucasus, but extending into northeastern Anatolia. Now, in terms of the geography of Turkey as a whole, this is actually a fairly small area in northeast Turkey. So the rectangle is drawn around the provinces of Rize and Artvin, so you can see up by the border of Georgia. In terms of linguistic research, the Laz language, also known as Lazuri, sometimes I've heard it referred to as Lazeti, is closely related to Mingrelian that is spoken here in Georgia, and more distantly to Georgian itself, so it's a Kartvelian language. And because of the difficulty of doing censuses, there's really no hard data on the number of speakers, and estimates range very widely from 50,000 to 500,000 speakers. And there are today essentially no monolingual speakers left of Lazuri. Everybody's bilingual in Lazuri and Turkish, and possibly also multilingual in other languages as well, such as Himshin or Georgian. There's a linguist named Sylvia Kutcher, based in Cologne, Germany, and she's probably the foremost expert outside of Turkey on the Laz language from a scientific linguistic perspective. So summarizing the social scientific and linguistic work from various anthropologists and other researchers, there's not a strong ethnic consciousness of Laz identity among people who speak the Laz language. The only marker of ethnicity is the Laz language itself, or Mazuri. And otherwise, they consider themselves to be Turks and Muslims. Now, in terms of Laz music, it hasn't been extensively researched, at least by the international ethnomusicological community. There's a few pages about Laz musical instruments in Lawrence Pickens' monograph on folk musical instruments in Turkey. And there's a short book published by a Japanese linguist who also has an interest in music, Goichi Kojima, Laz songs. And it's mostly transcriptions without a lot of historical background or other kinds of qualitative ethnography. The two musical instruments most associated with the Laz in northeastern Turkey are the kemençe, a box fiddle that's held vertically. You'll see video in a minute. And the tulum, or bagpipe. But I'm not going to talk extensively about these instruments. Now, besides the more specific meaning of Laz as an ethno-linguistic group in northeastern Turkey, the term Laz is used in a much broader meaning to mean basically anybody from the Black Sea coast of Anatolia. So basically from Istanbul all the way up to the Georgian border, generically people from the Black Sea coast may be referred to as Laz. And the typical story is that if you ask anybody from a Black Sea town or village, are you Laz? And they'll say, no, we're not Laz, but the people in the next valley over to the east, they're Laz. And that's when the Laz area started, but we're not Laz. Because the term has some negative implications, nobody wants to say that they're Laz in this more popular cultural meaning. It's always the people in the next valley over. And there are a number of popular cultural stereotypes about the Laz in this more general meaning of people from along the entire Black Sea coast. So they seem to be sort of dumb or dull-witted, but actually there's often a bit of cleverness behind it, and they often unwittingly point out the weaknesses of others. So there's elements of a trickster figure. The Laz are said to be quick-tempered. They very much like their guns and are very happy to fire them at any opportunity. They speak with a funny accent because they don't get right the vowel harmony of standard Turkish. There's a stereotype that the men are very macho and treat their women badly. They're said to be devout Muslims and very nationalist. So, for example, the city of Trabzon has a reputation for being extremely nationalist. And there are stereotyped characters, Temel and his wife, Fadime, who are the subject of a whole genre of ethnic jokes in Turkey, referred to as fukra. Literally anecdotes or jokes. The Laz, as inhabitants of the Black Sea coast, are also unfortunately racialized in rather unpleasant ways on the basis of a supposed phenotype that they have extremely long noses. So it's not, a Turk would say that it's not an accident that the current holder of the Guinness World Record for the longest nose happens to be a man from the Black Sea coast of Turkey. And within Turkish popular culture, these cultural and racial stereotypes abound in written form as well as in oral form. So there's a whole genre of Laz humor, including these Temel jokes. So the book cover on the left is a compilation of jokes about Temel, and the book on the right is a humor book where everything about economics is explained, written in Black Sea dialect, and with a certain amount of sort of silliness. that reflects on this idea of Black Sea coastal dwellers as being not particularly bright. Popular conceptions of Laz music is that the main instrument is the kemençe fiddle. There's very fast singing with a Black Sea accent. And there's a particular dance, the Horon regional dance, that involves a lot of shaking of the shoulders. And this is said to be inspired by the movements of the hamsi fish, a type of anchovy that is a staple of the coastal diet. So a little bit of video that I have a personal relationship to that some of you might know. So this is the Black Sea fiddle, the kemençe, and you'll also see a little bit of dancing, and then you'll see one young man who gets particularly excited about it and starts doing this shoulder wiggling thing that's associated with dance on the Black Sea So there's a genre of Turkish pop music called Laz pop. It's a sort of unofficial name. You'll hear it used. There's not like a chart for Laz pop, but it's a term that some people use to describe a hybrid pop music form that combines aspects of Black Sea coast folk musical style with urban pop and dance music. It's characterized by a danceable beat. The sound of the kemençe fiddle, like we just heard, is prominent, very fast singing and Black Sea accent, and the texts or images in the videos may refer explicitly to Black Sea region and regional culture. Typical album covers for Laz pop will show the artist with the sea in the background, so it's indicating this is music from the Black Sea, or in the case of the one in the bottom in the middle, he has a boat in the background. And I'll play a little bit as a representation of Laz pop, a video from 2003 by the artist Davut Gulolu. The lyrics are extremely macho, in fact misogynist. He talks about his friend, how come you can't keep your woman under control? Why don't you give her a slap across the face? So it's playing on these stereotypes about the macho Black Sea man. Now, since the 1980s, there has been a Laz ethnic cultural revival. This involves intellectuals, activists, and artists in Istanbul, especially university students, and in the diaspora in Germany, especially in Cologne, where there's a large number of people with Laz background. And this is in terms of the ethno-linguistic group of the Laz, not this broader concept of the Laz as being anybody from the Black Sea coast. And the participants in this Laz cultural revival reject the popular cultural stereotypes, especially musical stereotypes, and they focus on the recovery of the Laz language and trying to awaken what they think of as a dormant Laz ethnic consciousness. So they're trying to wake up again the sleeping Laz identity within people who may speak the Laz language and have a Laz background, but don't think of themselves as Laz, who think of themselves as just being Turkish. There's also part of this movement involves reestablishing cultural and linguistic ties with Mingrelian speakers across the border in Georgia. And I have a sort of provisional typology of 3 approaches to music within the context of the Laz cultural revival. So I call these a cosmopolitan youth approach, which basically involves doing rock music in the Laz language. And then the second I call the back to the roots approach, which involves using ethnomusicological methods to collect and document regional musics, and then publishing both the field recordings and archival material and arranged versions of the same material recorded in the studio. And then the third approach I call the neo-traditional approach. And this is about mostly contemporary acoustic arrangements of traditional material, as well as new compositions in traditional folk style. There's some overlap between these as different artists move between them at different stages of their career or for different specific projects. So the cosmopolitan youth approach basically consists of a genre known as Laz rock, and that's a term you hear. Sometimes you also hear Black Sea rock, Karadeniz rock. And the foremost proponents of this were a group called Zuashi Berepe, which means Children of the Sea in Lazuli. And this was formed in 1993 by university students from northeastern Turkey living in Istanbul. They released 2 albums of mostly original rock compositions in the Laz language, but then a few also sort of rock arrangements of traditional Laz material. Now here it moves into 7/8. I'm sorry, 5/8. But most of the songs on the album are actually newly composed entirely. Don't use any traditional material at all. Thank you. 5 minutes. So there's a song called Ernesto, which is actually a Laz language homage to Ernesto Che Guevara. And while Zuashi Berepe doesn't exist anymore, there's a couple groups, including prominently Marxis, that continue in this vein of Karadeniz rock or Laz rock. The second of the 3 approaches in my typology is what I'm calling the back to the roots approach. And representative of this approach is the musician Birol Topaloglu. He's a native speaker of Lazuli who learned Turkish as a second language after age 6 when he started school. He was professionally trained as an electrical engineer, but followed his interest in music and eventually turned professional as a musician, living full-time off of making music. And he began doing field research in Lazuli-speaking communities, recording and documenting songs. So, for example, the photo on the bottom right, he is the person on the right holding the microphone out. So doing recordings in the field and doing scientific documentation, getting all the information that one would need for good documentation. and he's released several albums of studio arrangements of material, including the stuff that he recorded in the field. And then he has also curated a collection of his own field recordings together with old archival recordings. So part of what I'm calling this back to the roots approach is about making the research process itself transparent, and not only publishing his arrangements of it in the studio, but also the original recordings. So here's a little bit of an archival recording of a song called Black Cabbage Song. So basically one voice singer accompanying himself on Kim and Che. And then his arranged version of it. So adding percussion, and then also adding second voice. And then the third of the three approaches that I identified of how music is being deployed within the context of the Laz cultural revival is what I call the neo-traditional approach. And this involves use of the acoustic guitar to accompany the voice with often very sparse arrangements, de-emphasizing the stereotypical Black Sea instruments of the kemenche and the tulum. They are used, but they're not dominating the sound. They're not in every song. And then this approach typically draws on the image of the singer-songwriter as a contemporary minstrel, and will often include new compositions in Turkish or other languages. And part of the iconography of this approach is to picture the musician not with a traditional Laz instrument, not with the kemenche fiddle or the tulum bagpipe, but with an acoustic guitar. So it sort of imports some of this image of the contemporary minstrel, the sort of Black Sea troubadour, as a kind of Bob Dylan kind of figure who writes his own material as well. So there's a bit of sort of authenticity deployment there in drawing on the iconography of Western popular music. And the musician that I'll talk about very quickly, since I'm already 2 minutes over, the singer Kazım Koyuncu, who died in 2005 of cancer attributed to the Chernobyl nuclear accident in Ukraine. He was a member of Suwashi Bedepe, but in his solo career, he cultivated, in his recordings at least, what I'm calling the neo-traditional style. He also had an interest in making, crossing the border with Georgia and finding material in Mingalian language and recording that as well. So a very quick example of and since I'm in Georgia, I have to mention Fuat Saka, who's born in Trabzon in Turkey, but he has family roots in Georgia. His mother is ethnic Georgian from Kars on the Turkish side of the border, and his father is from Georgia. So he was born and raised in Trabzon. He left Turkey for Germany, and after the coup in 1980, lived in exile for many years there, and worked with musicians from Georgia and from Greece, living in Germany. And his music has sometimes been referred to as Laz jazz due to the eclectic use of instruments and rhythms and the sometimes improvisatory quality. And he has a series of albums called Lazutlar, which actually doesn't refer to Laz. Lazut means grain of corn in northeastern Turkish dialect. He's collaborated before with members of the Georgian ethno-jazz group, the Sheen, and formalized this even more on the most recent album in the Lazutlar series that is credited to him and the Sheen collectively. I don't have time to play an example from that, though. What I've done here is outline very general overview of different musical articulations of Laz identity, and I suggest that they are effectively in dialogue with each other, competing performances of Laz identity, the Laz pulp, and the different approaches to sort of recuperating Lazness through music in the context of the Laz cultural revival. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, and we still have time for one short question. There.
Yeah,
I think Donna was quicker, so.
I just wanted to tell us, are there any female singers at all in this genre?
Yeah, there is one in particular, Ayşe Nur Kolilar, who, if I'd had time, would have been my second example under the back to the roots approach. So she's trained as an ethnomusicologist, working on her PhD in the conservatory in Istanbul, and she does field work and then does her own arrangements. And then she's also very much involved in sort of musical activism, community choirs and things like that.